Hello guys, and welcome to a new video today by me, Vulcan. Today I have for you something a little different from my normal gameplays. Today I have for you a basically overview of the latest update. Now I meant to do this last week, but a lot of stuff happened and I didn't manage to get around to it. So I decided to just go over it anyway, since a lot of the information is still quite useful. I'll leave a link in the description to this post so you guys can find it and read it for yourselves. But I'm just going to go through all of the different balance changes and so on and give my opinions on them and how I feel it's going to change the game. So yeah, let's get to it. So this is the And Justice for All update. And if we have a look, the key improvements are quite interesting. We've got some enhanced performance, so that would be quite nice for those of you who've been suffering with lower FPS than is expected. We've got a new interface option of text size, which is quite nice for accessibility. We've got the improved quick play and ranked games function, which now allows you to search from 1v1 to 4 vs 4 at the same time, which is great, although I don't think it's going to encourage people to use quick play any more than people are already. Quick play is pretty dead. If you ever want to play the game, guys, make sure you use custom, because it's just better. You know, you can choose all of the settings for your games, and people generally join a lot quicker in custom than you would trying to wait for a quick play game. It does happen, you can wait for a quick play game. Normally in 1v1, 2v2, you can normally get them quite quickly, but 3v3, 4v4 takes forever. With ranked games, it's interesting. I don't know why you would choose like 1v1 or 2v2, because in a ranked setting I don't think you'd ever want to be like queued up with random people in a ranked setting. Like, in my opinion, that's never going to happen. So like 2v2 ranked is normally always pre-mades at the moment. They've added 4 new music tracks. I don't have the music on in my game for copyright reasons, so I can't enjoy that, but I'm sure you guys will. Increased deployment phase time in 10v10 doesn't really affect me since I don't play 10v10 much, but that's increased from 3, or increased to 3 minutes from 2. We've got increased multiplayer menu, or improved multiplayer menu navigation. So that's quite nice. Improved deck building menu and modified multiplayer disconnection condition. That's basically fixing a lot of the disconnection problems in multiplayer, so that's great as well. In the general tab, it's mostly just fixes, so I won't really go over that too much. The only really important one is anti-tank cannons accuracy is now affected by stress. This is actually really important, because now what happens when a AT gun becomes stressed, it will hit less often, which it makes sense because it's under fire or whatever is causing it to be stressed. So yeah, they will just be less accurate in general, and I think this is quite a nice nerf to anti-tank guns, because it was quite annoying sometimes when like a 17-pounder, for example, would blow up your Tiger or your Panther or something when it was like pretty much fully stressed. It didn't really make sense. And the same goes the other way around, you know. German AT guns, especially like the lower AP ones, just penning your stuff, even though they're being pinned down, like, or have been for ages. It's kind of annoying. This is another actual quite big one as well. Remove the sniper rifle's ability to fire on the move. So they have to be stationary to fire now. That definitely makes it harder for you to use sniper rifles to pin down enemy squads. They won't just do it on the move, you need to have them in a decent position. And some may say this is also a very important fix, but I guess it just improves immersion in a lot of ways. And yeah, that's about it, I think. Some fixed pathfinding. And that's the lot for the general. In the single player campaign, they've made some improvements to the way that the game plays in general. That's quite nice for those of you interested in the single player campaign. You guys can read that yourself. And the modding changes are quite nice for people who are modders. I'm not personally, so it doesn't really affect me. But if we come down to the balancing, this is where things really start to get juicy. So if we look at global balancing, AAA now prioritizes ground attack aircraft over fighters unless they are evacuating. So this is really good, because AA's that little bit more effective than it used to be. Now, I think the improvements that they made to AA previously have been great. AA is actually decent at shooting down aircraft now, especially tripolstons and flak fillings. So that's great. There is some lethality in AA now. But better than that, your AA now has decent prioritization without you having to micro it so hard. So you always want to be focusing ground attack aircraft first, because they are the ones that are actually going to go for your AA. An intelligent player will always kill the AA first, so that when they come back for the next strike, the person's either have to rebuy the AA or they have a free time shooting whatever's on the ground. And that's really good. So having your AA automatically target those ground attack aircraft instead of fighters means that the fighters can't be used as bait like they sometimes are at the moment, or have been in the past. They've reduced their recon planes price. It'll be interesting to see if more people pick them up. I still think they're completely useless, mainly because they are actually still affected by line of sight. You have to be flying directly over things in order to see them, especially if they're in forests. I think the way to buff recon aircraft would be to make them see through cover, just like laser vision. I'm not even kidding, because then they would actually be useful and they'd be worth the cost of bringing them in. Whereas at the moment, I don't feel like they are at all. Even after the reduction in price, and they are relatively cheap now. They're great for single player, don't get me wrong, but in multiplayer, definitely not. They've reduced the supply trucks quantity in most divisions. This is nice to stop arty spam in general, and discourage arty spam throughout the game. They've reduced HMG suppression at close range. Excuse me. They've reduced HMG suppression at close range. Lethality remains high. Now this is another interesting change, because yeah, okay, your squad's not going to get pinned down so easy, so it allows you to move from cover to cover easier, but you're still going to take a hell of a lot of damage. And if, for example, you attack move towards a HMG and you don't realize you have done so, your unit may just run up to it and die without getting pinned down and getting the defensive bonus. So that's something you definitely have to be careful of moving forwards. They've reduced the mortar crew ammunition loadout, which is quite nice. I think they reduced it by about 10 rounds on most mortars, which means that you're going to rely a lot more on supply early game to resupply your mortars in general. And it's quite a nice change, I think, because mortars are basically overused at the moment, I think, in Phase A. You can't really live without a mortar in Phase A in a lot of cases. Some divisions you can get away with it, and some divisions I just generally don't use mortars because they're quite expensive on the division. But I think in 1v1 especially, mortar crews are incredibly important for smoking and just for pinning enemy units. So nerfing them a little bit will make people more wary of how they use them, which I think is a good change. They've reduced the HMG resilience, so this is simply the strength of the MGs. So an MG34 now has, instead of 5 strength, has 3 strength. MG42 6 to 4. The M1919 has gone from 7 to 3, which is a massive change. This really affects the 2nd Infantry a lot. Then we've got the Vickers from 5 to 4, which isn't too bad, and the 50 cal has gone from 6 to 5. So that's quite an interesting change, because I'm not entirely sure why the MG42 is only a 4-man squad and HMG's, the 50 cal, sorry, is a 5-man squad. It seems a bit unbalanced there, but it's not going to make too much of a difference. MG42 I think just has a bit higher suppression than the 50 cal, which is probably why they've done it that way. But either way, generally this is quite nice, because I'm sure everybody's come up against a HMG that just didn't want to die in a building. And now they do die. If a person just leaves a HMG in a building that's being targeted by a lot of units, they will die now, which is good and it makes sense. Whereas before, for example, a 7-man 30 cal there, that would just stay alive for the whole game, and you'd never really kill it off if it was in cover and so on. So I think, again, yeah, nice changes, general balance overall as well. It basically makes HMGs less annoying, but I guess retains their effectiveness, especially due to this HMG suppression thing. If we have a look at the allies then. So they've increased the price of off-map for the 203mm off-map in general to 140. They needed to nerf off-map, and that's how they've chosen to do it, just increase the price of it, which is fair enough. Let's see if that discourages people to use it so liberally, I guess. Reduced the 25-pounder dispersion, and the sexton is affected. This is a completely awesome buff, which indirectly buffs the Canadians quite a lot, because the Canadians have 2-star sextons, which can be 3-star, and they fire extremely quickly. And if their dispersion is less, they will hit what you want them to more. And this works especially well against Flak 88s, for example. So that's a really nice change to buff the allies' like artillery capabilities against annoying support units, especially like IG-18s and you know, like Flak 88s, like I've already mentioned. So that's, I think, a really nice change, and will encourage people to bring 25-pounders more in their divisions. They've increased the universal carrier Bren ammunition. That's fair enough, because they always used to run out of ammunition, so that makes sense. They've added a Humber Mark III AP3s. Oh, the AP3 back to the Humber Mark III. This is basically a few patches ago. They removed the 3 AP from the Humber Mark III, which basically meant that at close range they would no longer like instantly pop enemy APCs. But I think that was basically the only thing that the allies had to counter like 20 mil rushes, basically. You know, Humber Mark IIIs were good for stopping those 20 mil rushes, and I think having it back is quite nice. It was never overused in the first place, so I'm not entirely sure why they got rid of it. They've reduced the Humber Mark IV price from 80 to 75, which will encourage more people to buy it, which is nice. And the Staghound AA price from 60 to 50. Now this is quite a big change again, especially for the Canadians. It makes the Staghound AAs just worth bringing in again, which is nice. And they've increased the 50 cal price from 40 to 45, which I think is fair, because 50 cals are the only units that can pin down enemy half-tracks on the allied side of things, and they are very effective at doing so. So increasing their price slightly, I think, is fair. For the UK, we are going to see the Daimler AC price reduced, which is the little recon unit, which is quite nice. The Daimler Little John price has been reduced to 85, so we are going to be seeing those used a little more. They've increased the Churchill Crocodile flamethrower ammunition, reduced Bren Group's price. Now this is a big one, reducing the Bren Group's price from 15 to 10. There are certain divisions where availability can be a problem with the allies, and you would never bring Bren Groups just because they are 5-man squads and they aren't very good. Whereas now, with them only being costing of 10, it makes them a lot more viable to bring in. So yeah, that's quite an interesting change in my opinion. And I think we'll see a lot more Bren Group on the ground because of that, just to provide availability to your divisions, and also to bring in things like half-tracks. They've reduced the command carrier price from 20 to 15 as well, so that makes command infantry a lot more cost efficient, which is also very nice. If we look at the 6th Airborne, they've increased the Tetrarch turret speed. So fast chassis and slow turret speed created problems previously, apparently. So they've increased Tetrarch turret speed, which basically means they'll aim faster. Like when they are facing the wrong way, they'll turn their turret a lot quicker, which is quite nice, and basically allows them to be that little bit more effective, especially at like close range engagements. They've added 2 packs of 1 elite airborne 6-pounders in Phase A. This is a huge buff to the 6th Airborne, because they really struggled with their anti-tank capability in Phase A, and literally they fixed it by doing that. But these are 1 elite airborne 6-pounders, and with a command unit nearby, they're going to be 2-star 6-pounders, which is really good for Phase A. So that's quite nice. I would have even just justified bringing in just airborne 6-pounders without having the elite capability. I think that would have been fair. Just giving them actual AT guns rather than the really expensive 75mm they can get, like the captured pack 75mm. Yeah, I think maybe they went a bit overboard making them elite, but still, not going to complain. 6th Airborne's a division that I really like. I just don't play very often because it's not too strong, but hopefully that will buff it up a little bit and make it a bit more meaty in Phase A, which is really nice. If we look at the 15th Scottish, we've got moved the Recce with the Humber Mark III from Phase A to B. Not entirely sure why that change was made. I don't actually use Mark IIIs on the Scottish division anyway, so that doesn't really affect me too much, but I'm guessing that's to do with introducing the AP value back to the Humber Mark III. They want to balance it by moving its phase, which, fair enough. They've reduced the Churchill OP price from 140 to 120, so that's the off-map artillery for the Scottish. The light off-map artillery, so it's not very strong, but definitely makes it worth having on your division now, I think, just to provide the stunning capability and the ability to just panic opposing troops, even if the actual off-map isn't that lethal. So that's quite an interesting change. As for the Guard Armoured, the Guards Armoured is quite nice in that they've reworked the infantry tab entirely, and in general this has quite simply been they've added a lot of half tracks to Phase A. There's a lot more to it than that, but in general that's what it is. You can now get half tracks in Phase A, which is a really nice buff in my opinion, because it gives you those fire support units that can really make a difference. They've replaced the Cromwell OP with a Sherman 5 OP available in Phase B. Not entirely sure why that was done. Maybe just because the Cromwell OP was, I don't know, too weak or something. I'm not entirely sure what the change is about there, honestly. Stuarts from Phase A now come in packs of 5. I don't use Stuarts in Phase A with the Guards Armoured anyway, so that doesn't really make too much of a difference to me. I use the Command Stuarts, I think they have Command Stuarts, and that's what I would choose anyway. But yeah, they come in packs of 5 now, so you can spam them that little bit more in Phase A if you really want to. They've added 2 packs of 1 Tempest in Phase A. I actually added one of these to my division, because having a fighter to counter enemy like HS-129s and just ME-109 like rocket planes at the start in Phase A is really nice, like having something to just take those down, and a Tempest does nicely, so that's quite nice. And yeah, I've definitely added one of those to my division. They've increased the Typhoon AT XP. Not entirely sure if that's going to make too much of a difference. They've reduced the M5 half-track price from 20 to 15. Now that is a big change, especially with the changes to the Bren group that I showed you guys previously. So there was the change from 15-point Bren groups to 10-point Bren groups, and they've also changed the 20-point half-tracks to 15-point half-tracks. So now Guards Armoured can get Bren group in half-tracks for like 10 points less, which is a huge buff. And a really nice combination to bring in with the Guards Armoured in Phase A and B. So that's an awesome change. It really, I think, introduces more availability and more cost efficiency to the Guards Armoured in general, which is exactly what they needed because they really were lacking on the infantry front. They've removed the Cromwell 5 from Phase B, and they're now available as 2 packs of 3 in Phase A. So these are the weaker Cromwells with 11 AP and 7 armor, and they've moved them to Phase A so that they are more useful, I think, because I think you could only get them in Phase B previously, and then by then they wouldn't be very useful. But I think having them available in Phase A is a really nice change. They've also reduced the price of the Cromwell 7 from 140 to 120. This is the Cromwell with 11 AP and 11 armor, which is really, really nice. And they've changed the Cromwell 7's availability from 1 pack of 3 to 2 packs of 2. So in Phase B now you have the option between the Cromwell 7 and the Sherman 5. The Cromwell 7 is now a lot more cost efficient, which really fits thematically with the Guards Armoured, which is really nice. They have less machine guns, less sort of capability of pinning down infantry, but still a really nice tank to use. They've inverted the Cromwell's AP and HE shells repetition. Not entirely sure what that means, honestly. Reduced the Sherman 5 price from 150 to 140. So that's basically to encourage more people to use them in general, I think, rather than a direct balance change. Sherman 5s, they're good if you have enough of them to like overrun opposing armor. And in the Guards Armoured, I kind of feel like your Phase B and Phase C is all about overwhelming. So yeah, I think this is quite a nice change in general for the Guards Armoured. If we go down to the 3rd Canadian Infantry, the Staghound AA are now available in 2 packs of 4 veterans in Phase A. So this is why the price buff for the Staghound AA really affects the 3rd Canadian Infantry, because adding these Staghound AAs with the veterancy to Phase A makes them the most awesome 800 meter fire support vehicles in the game, for the allied side of things anyway. Their twin 50 cals really just rip to shreds opposing infantry. They've increased the RAM price, which I think is fair, because the RAM was extremely good and still is. It's just costing more, which I think is fair. They moved the Tripolston from Phase A to B. Since you have Staghound AAs, I think that's fair. You don't need the Tripolston as well anyway. And they've reduced the Elite CMP Tripolston to a single pack, so you can only get one of the Elite CMP Tripolstons, which means you're not going to be like insta-popping every ME-109 that comes into the sky anymore with both of them, because you would get like 3 or 2 3-star Tripolstons, which is really, really strong. However, what they have done is increase the Crusader AA Mark II availability from 3 to 4 per pack, and they've added 2 packs of Elite Crusader AA Mark IIs in Phase C, which is interesting because the Crusader AA Mark IIs are basically as effective as Tripolstons. And adding 2 Elite Crusaders makes the Canadians even stronger than they were before, because those Crusader AAs aren't easy to get rid of, and with them being elite, will shoot down aircraft left, right and center, as well as demolish infantry. So that's a really, really interesting change to the Canadian infantry. I don't think they needed it, honestly. This is a decent change. The Crusader AA Mark II availability, that's fair. But adding 2 units of Elite Crusader AAs, I kind of feel like the 3rd Canadian is going to be used so often now because of that, as well as the other changes in general, especially to the Staghound AAs. So that'll be interesting to see. The M8 Greyhound price has been reduced, which I think is fair for the USA, because they just weren't used very often. And I think now that they will be brought in a little bit more often. And they've reduced the Ford GPA, OP and transport version speed. So this is just to stop them running away so easily when they get found. Especially for like the off-map versions. Transport versions, I guess they just think they're too fast in general, which I think is fair. In terms of the 3rd Armoured, well, they've reduced the M4A375 price from 160 to 150, which I think is fair, although I still don't think that anybody's going to be using the 75mm versions of the Shermans, just because they are pretty useless in comparison to, for example, the Jumbos and the 76mm you can get in the same phases. And they've added 2 packs of 3 veteran M5A1 Stuarts in Phase A. This is an interesting change because it basically would make people want to bring in a unit of Command Stuarts alongside a unit of veteran M5A1s on their divisions, instead of 2 cards of like Command Stuarts. But I still, in my division, feel that 2 cards of 2 Command Stuarts is better than having an extra veteran Stuart, because the Command Stuarts are so useful and so versatile, not only for being strong tanks in Phase A, but also decent command in Phase B and C for infantry support specifically, which is why they're on the division in the first place. I don't think that's going to make many people swap them out, honestly, unless people like spamming Stuarts. But in Phase B, they kind of become redundant very quickly, so that's interesting. So they've reduced the Sherman M4A3E2 Jumbo side and rear armor from 12 to 10 and 10 to 9. I think this is more of a realism change, because the Sherman like Jumbo, I don't think actually had improved side and rear armor compared to the normal Sherman. It just had increased frontal armor. I'm not entirely sure if that's the case. I'm sure you guys will correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, I'm pretty sure that the Sherman was still weak on the side and rear. It wasn't just improved overall with the increased armor. They've also reduced Rosie the Rocketeer from 100 to 85, and that's the recon plane with rockets attached to the wings. And I didn't think that anybody actually used it, but apparently people do, and yeah, I think that's a nice buff just to increase the use of it in general, because I don't think anybody really brought it in the first place. Either way, 101st Airborne, let's have a look. Reduced the Locust price from 70 to 65. Not entirely sure that's the biggest change ever, but I guess will encourage more people to use the M22 Locust than previously. And the Locust is quite a nice support tank in general for Phase A, dealing with half-tracks and light armoured vehicles. It doesn't really match up against other enemy tanks, so yeah, I think that's an interesting change. They've increased the Airborne Engineer's price from 30 to 35. Now this is the big nerf. They've increased the Airborne Engineer's price from 30 to 35. Availability reduced to 1 pack of 4 rookies and 1 pack of 3 veterans. So you used to get 2 packs of 5 veterans, which is 10 in total. Now you can only get 7 in total, and 4 of those are now rookies, which means they don't even have 1 star. They completely nerfed the availability of engineers and made them more expensive. And in general, I think that's completely warranted. Airborne engineers were extremely strong. Whether or not they have veterancy doesn't really matter, because the napalm is AoE based, so it just does damage no matter what. And at 100 meter range, airborne engineers will still beat anything on the map, because they are 11-man squads with a flamethrower. But yeah, this is just nice because you have less of them to use, and it makes them a lot more valuable to a 101st player, which I think is a good change in general. So that's quite nice. They've increased the off-map artillery from 150 to 160. Honestly, I think they could have increased the price more for the GPOP, but there we go. I still like the fact that they nerfed it. Increased the M8 Scott availability from 3 to 4 per pack. Not entirely sure that's going to encourage people to use M8 Scotts as 101st, but an interesting change. Reduced the 37mm gun availability by 1 per pack. So previously you used to have the 37mm and you could spam them everywhere. They only cost like 40 points, right? And they would just create this massive AT field, which is so strong. But now you have a lot less availability. Again, they become a lot more valuable. And I think that will change the way that the 101st play so much, because like the airborne engineers, you have to be a lot more careful about how you're using these units. They've reduced the Phase A P-51D Mustang with the 250 bombs availability to 1 per pack. So that's, yeah, just in general, allowing you to have less P-51D Mustangs in Phase A. I think you can only get 1 of them now, which I think is fair. People sometimes would spam these out at the start, and they could get pretty obnoxious. So only having 1 of them, I think, will just make people play a bit more, I don't know, tactically, I guess. Like, they would make more tactical decisions rather than just like spamming one thing or the other. So, oh, it's a forest map, let's spam airborne engineers. Oh, it's quite an open map, let's spam M3 guns. Oh, they're using a lot of artillery, let's spam P-51 Mustangs, right? It's less about just using one unit or the other now. It's a lot more sort of variation, which is really nice, and I really like the changes to 101st in this patch. The 2nd Infantry, they've increased the Ranger support price from 20 to 25, and they've increased the Ranger Marauder price from 30 to 35. 2nd Infantry have been nerfed so hard by this patch, and I don't know why. I think the 2nd Infantry just took an absolute beating for no reason, because aside from these changing, I think this one's maybe warranted because the Ranger supports are really strong. But the Ranger Marauders, I think, as only like a 4-man squad, they can't really be warranted to be any more expensive, because they're the only thing that can really, I don't know, I guess they're the only thing that gives the 2nd Infantry a unique playstyle. You do get like Panzer Abwehrs, which are the 4-man Panzerschreck squads, for like the Fallschirmjägers and the Luftlander, for example. But the Ranger Marauders were the only squad like those that the Allies had. And I think that uniqueness about the division was really nice, and making them more expensive will discourage more people to use them, and I think that's a shame, because more people are going to be relying just playing on bazooka squads now. As for the Ranger support price, like I said, I think that's fair. But the other thing that we got to remember is that the 30 cal machine guns are now only 3-man squads. So where you used to be able to get a 2-star 7-man 30 cal squad, you can now only get a 2-star 3-man 30 cal squad, which makes their effectiveness way less, you know, like it's just not as good. So that's a huge change, and I think in general the 2nd Infantry got nerfed really hard on their infantry tab, where they already struggle with availability. So that's really quite tough for the 2nd Infantry players. As for the Panzerner, they've added 2 packs of Wolverines in Phase B. This is quite nice because it allows you to choose between the 16-pounders or 17-pounder variants and the Wolverines. And yeah, I think in general just balances the AT tab a little bit more. Just in case you don't need that improved AT, you just need the improved, or the AP, sorry, and you just need the improved range, then Wolverines do that perfectly well. They moved the Sherman 5 OP from Phase C to Phase B, so might encourage people who use artillery a lot to use that more, which is fair enough. I think the Panzerner definitely lacked some sort of punching power in Phase B, so bringing them a off-map to use is quite nice. And they've increased the Jeep Z NKM availability in Phase A, and they've removed them from Phase B. I think that's fair. Nobody uses Jeeps in Phase B. In Jeeps in Phase A, those are the 50 cal Jeeps, they can come in quite handy. They've reduced the Sherman 5 price as well from 160 to 150, which again is just a nice little price buff. Allows the Panzerner to bring in like an extra unit of rifles, for example. You know, just those extra 10 points is quite nice. It just gives you the availability to support your tanks more with infantry, which is a good change. So as for the Axis side of things, there aren't many more changes for the Axis, but there are just a few in general. They've improved the Flak 38 and Flak Villing efficiency. I'm not sure what they mean by efficiency, whether that means how often they hit, or their accuracy, or their rate of fire. I don't know. It's kind of a bit of a, I mean, that could mean anything. I'm not entirely sure what that's supposed to mean. Added more realistic ammunition loadout on infantry. Again, doesn't really tell us too much, other than that ammunition loadout has been changed slightly. Not entirely sure that's going to, you know, change how infantry plays for the Axis side of things anyway. This is an interesting one. I don't understand this at all. You guys know how much I love IG-18s, but why did they buff them? This is a buff, right? Increase the IG-18 stealth from bad to medium. So they can hide better in tree lines and hedges than they could before. It means that recon has to be closer to spot them. And that's just going to get incredibly obnoxious. These were annoying to deal with to begin with. I guess they're easily countered by like artillery, and maybe this is basically giving the IGs a little bit more chance to get away from artillery, because they will go into stealth quicker, right? But still, in my opinion, I don't think this needed to be changed. You just buffed IG-18s again. The 800 meter to 1000 meter range change made IGs viable and very much used again, which is great. But increasing their stealth so they hide better, I don't think that was needed at all. So I don't really agree with that change, but fair enough. The Schwimmwagen BER, the observation post version, will price increase, so that's just increasing off-map artillery cost again, which I think is fine. Increasing the Panzerwerfer price from 110 to 120. Again, I think that's a good change, because Panzerwerfers were, again, very obnoxious in Phase A, and certain divisions really rely on that Panzerwerfer, and you'll see it quite often. So I think that's a fair change. You know, it's not a massive price increase for what sort of damage it does. They reduced the HS129B1 and the JU87G AP from 12 to 9. This is a massive change. Losing 3 AP on those like cannons on the HS129 and the JU87 is huge. You're really going to have to go for like the side and rear armor shots now with those planes in order to get the kills that you want. So that reduces their lethality quite a lot. And I guess it kind of introduces some sort of counterplay to the allies. So the allies can now like reverse away from the direction of a plane or drive towards the direction of where the plane's coming from, and the plane will have to hit the front armor, right? So that I think is quite simply a change to create more counters to like aircraft, like AP based aircraft. So it's an interesting one. I'm not entirely sure how much it will make a difference. I still think that HS129s and JU87s will be very strong, but in general, they're going to be having a hard time penetrating. The only thing that we need to think about, though, I always forget about this, the increase of, I think the main reason they've actually done it, thinking about it, is because when attack aircraft come in onto, you know, tanks and stuff, they fly from maximum range to quite close range very quickly. And as they're getting closer, every 100 meters, they gain like AP, for example, they gain 1 AP. And that, like, every shot that is fired closer will basically increase by about 1 or 2 AP, which is quite a big deal, and will cause the planes to be a lot more lethal than they were when they were firing at max range. So I think maybe that's just a nerf in general to stop like max range shots, just one-shotting things more often. I guess it's a fair change. I mean, it's not going to change the way I play much because I don't tend to use those units very often anymore. But, you know, in general, it's quite nice. The reduction of the HS129B3 AP from 18 to 16 is not going to make too much difference because allied armor in general can be penetrated very easily by 16 AP. Only really affects jumbo front armor. That's literally the only thing that changes. HS129B3 is still going to be just as effective against most targets. Right, now down to the specific changes for the Axis. We got the Fallschirmjäger. They've changed the L6. They've reduced the rate of fire and now fires bursts of 12 rounds. So this is, I'm not entirely sure how this affects the damage that an L6 is going to do, but in general it's a nerf to like how quickly they used to fire, which I think is nice because their rate of fire was broken previously. Like it was like pretty much confirmed that the rate of fire of the L6 was broken, and that's why it did so much damage so quickly. They've increased the ammunition loadout to its IRL value of 396. I think increasing the ammunition's fine. And they've increased the price. So again, just an overall like nerf to the L6 I think was definitely needed. So I think that's fair. We'll have to see how it plays out, and I'm sure they'll make more adjustments if the L6 is still very effective. As for the Fallschirm Pioneers, they've increased the price from 30 to 40. And I think they've done that because the Fallschirm Pioneers are 2-star command infantry. And if you guys didn't know, increased veterancy on command units increases the radius of their like command ability, so the radius at which they can buff other units surrounding them. And making them more expensive I think makes sense because they were extremely cost efficient. They've reduced the PaK 41 in unarmed Kubel XP from elite to veteran. So this is the PaK 41 Gerlich. This is the small AT gun. And there used to be 2-star elite variances, but they've now reduced them to veteran. So they're only like 1-star PaK 41s. I think that's an interesting change. And I think it honestly is probably fair because those 3-star AT guns with like a command unit nearby were really hard to deal with, and much like how the airborne have the M3 guns, which they used to be able to spread across really easily, the Fallschirmjägers had the PaK-41s, and yeah, they were just as annoying. So I think that's a good change in general, and that's in the unarmed ones. As for the PaK-41s in Kubel MGs, the availability has been reduced. So I'm not entirely sure if they changed the veterancy of the PaK-41 Guerlichs in the Kubel MGs, but they definitely reduced the availability. So I think now you can get 2 packs of 1-star PaK-41s in unarmed Kubels, and then you can get probably 2 packs or 2 PaK-41s in Kubel MGs with the same veterancy as before. I think in general it's just an availability nerf to the PaK-41s and reducing the veterancy in general, which I think is a nice change. A lot like how they balance the airborne engineers for the 101st. I think that's a good idea. They've reduced the Fallschirmscharfschütze rate of fire from 10 to 8, but they've increased the ammunition from 3 to 30. So basically just making them like a sniper squad, like they should have been. Ammunition loadout increase is very much needed, of course, because they went basically useless without that. They replaced the Luftwaffenjäger. They lose 1 MG42 and Panzerfaust, and they gave them a Pulse-Patron or Faustpatron with less accuracy. So basically the reserve, or well, disheartened reserves, the Luftwaffenjäger, now have a different AT weapon called a Faustpatron, which is less accurate, and they lose the MG, like I said. So just in general, balancing that unit, I didn't see a use for it very much because I always use Fallschirm Pioneers in their place. I think in my review, my deck overview, I had them in there originally, but I swapped them out in the end for Fallschirm Pioneers, and so this doesn't really affect me, but maybe for those people who use Luftwaffenjäger quite a lot, it's probably a decent nerf in general. I didn't really see their effectiveness in the first place, but maybe they were really strong and I didn't notice. They've increased the Fallschirm AAA units veterancy to veteran, so I think that's again just to encourage people to use the 20 mils as fire support units. Not entirely sure what the entirety of that buff's about, but they've increased the LG42 XP by 1 step. That's a really nice change for that unit. The LG42 is the upgraded version of those little like rocket units, and I'm not sure how they entirely work, but basically they're a lot like RG18s. They have the 9 HE power at 1000, or I think it might be even 800 meter range with the LG42s. I can't remember off the top of my head, but either way, increasing their XP is going to make their AP shot a lot more useful, because I think they have 10 AP and 9 HE. So yeah, the XP buff is literally for the AT value. I don't think that the LG42s were necessarily killing enough vehicles to be useful, and that's why they've done that. I'm not entirely sure. I don't use the third Fallschirmjäger too much, but that's the reasoning that I can see in my head. They've also reduced the 120mm mortar availability from 3 to 2 per pack. I think that's fair, you know. Like I said before, mortars are very prevalent at the moment, so nerfing them in general I think was going to happen, and that's just another nerf to mortars. 116th Panzer, they removed the Ju-87G from Phase A. I guess that must have been too obnoxious. They've increased the Panzer III M price from 105 to 110, and they've removed the 2343 from Phase B. They only had 3 in IRL. I'm not entirely sure why they're trying to be historically accurate here. Like whether or not that actually affects the balance of the game, I'm not entirely sure. I think it was fine that they had more than they should have in real life. I think that's a perfectly reasonable balance thing, or perfectly reasonable pseudo balance thing that doesn't really matter, right? Nobody cares that they had only 3, except from maybe some history buff, right? So nerfing that kind of doesn't make sense to me. I think the 2343s were one of the more useful units that the 116th Panzer, and I think in general nerfing the 116th Panzer is completely unwarranted. I think they're pretty damn weak right now, because they can just be countered by AT guns in general. Maybe they made the nerf preemptively, I don't know. Because maybe they looked at the 116th and said that, oh, with the general nerfs to AT guns, especially in like making stress reduce accuracy, the 116th will be stronger now. Maybe, but I don't think that's going to be too much of the case. So that's pretty much my look at the latest patch changes, and my opinions on them, and whether I think they're decent or not. Again, I'll leave a link to the post in the description. Hopefully this was informative. It's quite a long video, so I understand if you guys didn't even get to the end. But either way, hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.